Andrew wakes up married to the girl who disappeared from his life 10 years ago. Is it a mistake or a chance he can't afford to miss? Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. It takes just a second for you but means the world to me. Andrew woke up to a tormenting sensation of dryness in his mouth and heaviness in his head. His skull throbbed as if it had been struck by a sledgehammer, and the light seeping through the curtains stabbed at his eyes. He groaned, reaching for his phone, but instead of the smooth surface, his hand landed on something warm and soft. What the? He abruptly opened his eyes and froze. Next to him on the pristine white sheets lay a girl who looked like a vision. Her skin was pale and smooth, almost porcelain-like, and her breathing gently lifted and lowered her chest. Dark waves of hair cascaded over her face, framing delicate features as if drawn by an artist's hand. Her lips were slightly parted, as though caught in a serene dream, and long lashes cast faint shadows on her cheeks. Her arms were carelessly sprawled, and on her finger gleamed a gold ring. A final touch to the mysterious image. Andrew jerked his hand back, his heart pounding faster. Panic surged through him as he sat up in bed, trying to grasp what was happening. His gaze darted around the room. Clothes were scattered on the floor, empty glasses stood on the nightstand, and on the table lay some document. His vision blurred, but squinting, he managed to read the words. Marriage certificate. What the hell? He grabbed the paper, scanning the lines. His name, the date, yesterday. The girl's name. He froze, reading it over and over again. Kate Wallace. The name seared through his consciousness, yanking him from his drunken haze. His heart clenched as if someone had squeezed it in a fist. This couldn't be real. That name had haunted him all his life. The name of the woman he had loved. The one who had vanished 10 years ago without a trace, without an explanation. No, this can't be her. He turned sharply to face the girl. His breath hitched, fingers tightening around the document. Carefully, as if afraid to wake a ghost from the past, he leaned forward and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Kate. Her features had barely changed. The same high cheekbones, soft lips, long lashes, slightly upturned nose. Everything was the same, yet more mature. A little more worn. Deeper than in his memories. How? How is this possible? His thoughts scattered, refusing to obey logic. Andrew ran a hand over his face, struggling to recall anything from last night. But all he could summon were fragmented flashes. Laughter, lights, dancing, kisses. A ceremony? God, had it really happened? Kate stirred, letting out a faint groan. He held his breath, watching as she slowly opened her eyes. A second, two, and her gaze met his. At first, there was only drowsiness, then confusion, then horror. Oh God, she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut as if hoping that when she reopened them, everything would turn out to be a dream. Andrew clenched his fists. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it would break free from his chest. Good morning, wife. She shot up, her hair falling into her face, her breathing erratic. She scanned the room in shock before her gaze snapped back to him. Fear and recognition flashed in her eyes. This is a mistake, she choked out. This couldn't have happened. Andrew let out a dry chuckle, though inside, everything was turning upside down. Are you sure? He waved the paper in front of her face. This looks pretty official to me. Kate clutched her head. I don't remember. He took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the last shreds of composure. We need to figure out what happened. Step by step. If you remember anything, tell me. Kate shut her eyes, inhaled deeply, and exhaled. Then in a whisper she said, I remember music and lights. You said something. Something important. Andrew frowned. He could feel it, the key to this mystery was close. They just had to find it. Andrew couldn't take his eyes off Kate. He still couldn't believe that it was really her sitting in front of him. The girl who had disappeared 10 years ago, leaving him with a million questions and a shattered heart. And now she was sitting in bed before him, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with shock. Kate was breathing heavily, as if trying to gather her thoughts. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on the marriage certificate, and her fingers trembled. No. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "This is impossible. This must be a mistake." Andrew nodded slowly, though inside a storm was still raging. "I'd love to agree with you if not for this piece of paper," he said, waving the document in the air. "And the rings on our fingers." Kate's eyes darted to her left hand. Her face turned pale. She yanked the ring off and clenched it in her fist. "We need to annul this. Immediately. This is ridiculous." She shut her eyes tightly, as if trying to erase what had happened. Andrew frowned. Thoughts raced through his mind. Of course it made sense to annul the marriage. They didn't even remember how it had happened. But something inside him resisted. For some reason he didn't want to let this go so easily. He didn't want to let her go. "At least let me understand how this happened," he finally said. "Try to remember something. How did we even end up here?" Kate shook her head. I only remember flashes. Music lights. We were laughing. You said something important." She furrowed her brows as if trying to grasp a fading memory. And then, everything just faded into a blur. Andrew tensed, trying to recall anything. Fragments surfaced. Him and Kate at a bar, her laughter, her hand in his. But how had they ended up married? That remained a mystery. "We need to find whoever married us," he said firmly, "and figure out what happened." Kate closed her eyes and let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, but after that, we annul the marriage immediately." Her voice was resolute, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Andrew didn't respond. A thought took root in his mind, one that scared him. What if this wasn't just an accident? What if fate had given them a second chance? A few minutes passed, the initial wave of shock slightly subsiding. Kate rubbed her temples and stood up, unsteady on her feet. She walked over to the mirror and looked at herself. Red-rimmed eyes, dry lips. It was as if the night had stolen not just hours from her, but years. "We need to talk to the hotel staff," she said, meeting Andrew's gaze in the reflection. "Maybe someone saw something." Andrew nodded and stood up, feeling the tension in his entire body. "First, let's find our phones," he muttered, starting to search the room. "Maybe there are photos or messages." A few minutes later, he found his phone under the chair. Carefully unlocking the screen, he saw dozens of notifications, but one message caught his attention the most. It was a picture of the two of them. They were standing together in front of a small chapel, holding each other, beaming with happiness. "Kate, you need to see this," he said quietly. She stepped closer, looking at the screen, and her face turned ghostly white. Her fingers trembled as she touched the photo, as if trying to confirm it was real. "This can't be," she whispered. "We actually..." Andrew tilted his head, studying the picture. "And we look happy," he added. It sounded almost accusatory. Kate covered her mouth with her hand, took a few steps back and sat down on the bed. She shook her head, as if trying to dispel the chaos in her mind. "We need to know what we said to each other," she whispered. "Last night, during all of this, I need to understand why we did this." Andrew took a deep breath. "I think the first step is to find a witness to our wedding." Andrew sat on the edge of the bed, staring into nothingness. Thoughts swirled in his mind like whirlpools, pulling him back into the past. 10 years ago, he had been a 17-year-old boy dreaming of a future where Kate was always by his side. They had met in high school during a literature class. She had sat by the window, absent-mindedly doodling patterns in the margins of her notebook, and had smiled at him for the first time when he couldn't hold back his laughter over a ridiculous line from an old novel. Everything had changed since then. He remembered their walks along the waterfront, their dreams, their late-night phone calls when they promised each other they would move to New York and start a new life together. But one day she had just disappeared. No note, no call, no explanation. One day he had gone to her house, but her mother had answered the door and coldly informed him that Kate no longer lived there. "I never understood why you left," he said quietly, not looking at Kate. She was silent. Sitting across from him, her fingers clenched together, nails pressing into her palms. There was something painfully familiar in her gaze, a mix of guilt and fear. "I didn't want to leave," she finally whispered. I was forced to. Andrew lifted his head, his brows furrowing. By who? Kate sighed, rubbing her temples. My mother. She decided you weren't right for me. That I had to go to college in another city so I wouldn't make the biggest mistake of my life. She controlled everything, my calls, my letters, everything. I tried to write to you, but I don't know if any of them reached you. Andrew's eyes darkened. Not a single letter. Not one, Kate. I waited. I searched for you. I thought you just left me. She closed her eyes. I know. I suspected that's what you thought, but I couldn't do anything. Andrew stood up, running a hand over his face. And now, 10 years later, we meet again. In Vegas. In a marriage we don't even remember. He let out a bitter laugh. Do you think this is just a coincidence? Kate shook her head. I don't know. But I want to find out. They both understood. The threads of the past were intertwining again, and fate had given them a chance to finally confront the words left unsaid. But one question remained. Was this truly a second chance, or just another mistake? Kate stood up from the bed and walked to the window. The city beyond shimmered with morning lights, life moving on as if nothing had happened. She ran her fingers along the glass and sighed. All of this, it's too strange, she said, not turning around. Sometimes it feels like someone is playing with us. Andrew watched her, feeling an unfamiliar emptiness inside. He suddenly realized how much he had missed her voice, her movements, even that subtle sadness he had always noticed in her eyes. You know, I always thought that if we ever met again, I'd ask you why you left and then just walk away, he said. But now I'm not sure I want to leave. Kate turned to him and their eyes met. I'm not sure either, she admitted. But we need to figure this out. Find out what happened last night. And maybe understand what still connects us after all these years. Andrew nodded. Then let's start from the beginning. Kate and Andrew stepped out of the hotel, overwhelmed by the morning hustle of Vegas. The city never slept, and despite their personal turmoil, life around them carried on. They walked silently along the sidewalk until they reached the bar where, presumably, their crazy night had begun. Do you think anyone will remember us? Kate murmured, glancing around nervously. In a city like this? I'm sure there are dozens of couples like us, Andrew replied, but still pushed open the bar's door. Inside it was nearly empty. A bartender wiped down the counter while a couple of patrons lazily sipped coffee after a sleepless night. The man behind the counter, a burly figure with graying temples and a faded tattoo on his forearm, looked up at them indifferently. Good morning, Andrew said, stepping closer. We were here last night. The bartender snorted. Last night this place was packed. What do you need? Kate took a step forward. We're trying to remember what happened. Did you see us? We were together. The bartender smirked. Oh, I remember you too. Dancing, laughing, kissing by the counter, declaring it was fate. Honestly, I envied your energy. Kate and Andrew exchanged glances. Are you sure? Andrew asked. Did we insist on getting married? The bartender chuckled. You were demanding to be married immediately. Kept shouting that you had finally found what you lost. Your determination was impressive. Kate ran a hand over her forehead. This is insane. The bartender shrugged. Maybe it is, but you looked happy. Want another wedding? I can recommend a few places where they'll marry you in 5 minutes. Andrew shook his head. Thanks, but one's enough for now. They left the bar in utter confusion. So we wanted this, Kate said slowly. But why? Andrew stopped in his tracks. Why did we think this was fate? Kate shook her head. The more they learned, the more questions arose. We need another witness, she finally said. Someone who saw us afterward. A few streets away, they found someone who might know the truth. A homeless musician sitting near the entrance of the chapel where they had been married. He plucked at the strings of an old guitar, humming an unfamiliar melody. Excuse me, sir, Andrew addressed him. Were you here last night? Did you see us? The musician slowly lifted his head, smiling. Of course I saw you. You two are a rare case. First you cried, then you laughed, then cried again. And then you said you'd never part again. Kate froze. Cried? Why? The musician scratched his beard thoughtfully. You were talking about the past. About second chances that don't come for nothing. About lost time. Andrew felt something twist inside him. So it hadn't just been drunken madness. Their past really did matter. What else did we say? Kate asked quietly. The musician smiled. You said you found each other again. And that this wasn't something to let go of. Kate and Andrew returned to the hotel without saying a word. The information they had gathered had shaken them. The mistake they had assumed now seemed like a deliberate choice. But why? Why had they so desperately wanted to be together again? Kate sat on the edge of the bed, holding her head in her hands. A growing unease settled in her chest. Everything felt too implausible. None of this makes sense, she murmured, finally breaking the silence. Why did we do this? We hadn't even seen each other in 10 years. Andrew stood by the window, gazing out at the street, but his eyes reflected not the neon lights of Vegas but memories. He clenched his jaw, turned and looked at Kate. We thought we had closed the past, but maybe we hadn't, he said. If we were so sure last night, maybe it means something. Kate closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. I just don't understand. She shook her head. We met again after all these years, and instead of just talking, we got married. Because deep down we're still connected, Andrew said quietly. Maybe we never really forgot each other. Kate looked at him, her eyes glistening with suppressed emotions. Do you really think that? Andrew hesitated, then sat beside her on the bed. Honestly, I don't know. But I do know that when I saw you yesterday, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Kate clasped her hands together, her breath unsteady. Me too. But what do we do about it? Andrew smirked slightly. Figure it out. Together. We need to understand what brought us here. Kate slowly nodded, for the first time all day, feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could find the answers. Andrew woke up to the faint noise outside the window. The morning sun's rays filtered through the curtains, filling the room with a soft glow. He turned his head and saw Kate sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in her hands. Her hair was loosely tied up, and her gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance. Good morning, he said hoarsely, rubbing his eyes. Kate turned and smiled. Good morning. I ordered coffee. I hope you still like it black. Andrew gave a faint smile and nodded. That small gesture made him pause. She remembered. After all these years, she still remembered how he took his coffee. He got up and walked over to the table, picked up his cup and took a sip. The bitter taste burned his tongue. Yet there was something comforting about it. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. This still feels surreal, Andrew finally said. We haven't seen each other in 10 years, and now suddenly we're married. Kate set her cup down and looked at him. I don't think it's just a coincidence, she said quietly. Didn't you feel it yesterday? Something real. Andrew thought about it. Yesterday, when they had talked, argued, laughed, it had felt like old times when they were inseparable. But could that erase all the years apart? I don't know, Kate, he sighed. I want to believe this means something, but can one night really change 10 years? Kate lowered her eyes. We can find out, she said, looking back up at him. Let's live together for a few days. No pressure, no decisions. Just get to know each other again. Andrew slowly nodded. That made sense. They had come this far, why not try? All right, he said. A few days. She smiled, and relief flickered in her eyes. He knew what this meant to her. They spent the entire day together. They walked around the city, reminiscing about high school, eating at a small Italian restaurant where Kate ordered her favorite seafood pasta. And Andrew got a medium-rare steak, just like old times. You always ordered that, Kate smirked, looking at him. And you always got pasta, he shot back. At least some things never change. She smiled, and at that moment he felt something strange. An ease that had been missing from his life for years. After dinner they went to the waterfront, where the air was fresh and cool. Kate stopped by the railing, gazing at the shimmering city lights. Do you remember how we used to dream about moving to New York? She asked. Andrew chuckled. You always said you wanted a small apartment in Manhattan and to drink coffee from a local cafe every morning. Kate smiled. And you wanted to own a bookstore and read all day. Still do, he admitted. What about you? Do you still dream of New York? She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe dreams change. Maybe it's not about the place but about the person you're with. Andrew felt something shift inside him. Maybe she was right. But as soon as they returned to the hotel, his doubts crept back in. He watched Kate sitting beside him on the bed and wondered, had fate really given them a second chance, or was this just a beautiful illusion fueled by nostalgia? Andrew had long felt that Kate was hiding something. Despite the ease in their conversations over the past few days, there was often a flicker of worry in her eyes, as if she were expecting something bad to happen. Today, that feeling had become unbearable. They were sitting in a small cafe by the waterfront. Kate nervously stirred her coffee with a spoon, while Andrew watched her intently. Suddenly, she flinched when a message popped up on her phone. She quickly read it and immediately turned off the screen. Kate, what's going on? Andrew asked, his gaze unwavering. Nothing, just. She forced a smile, but he could see the tremor in her fingers. Don't lie to me. His voice grew firmer. I can see that you're scared. Who's messaging you? Kate took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to speak. Andrew. She started but hesitated. She looked as if an internal battle was raging within her. You can trust me, he said gently. Who's threatening you? She closed her eyes, then exhaled as if making a decision. My parents. They want me to marry someone else. Someone who's beneficial to them. Kate let out a bitter laugh. And our sudden marriage ruins their plans. Andrew frowned. Who is he? Kate shook her head. His name is Richard Grayson. He's from a family that has been working with mine for years. To them, this marriage is just a business deal. They never cared about what I wanted. And you would have agreed? His voice carried a hint of anger. Of course not, she snapped. But I had no choice. Until yesterday. Andrew leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he had just heard. So they won't leave you alone? Kate nodded. They've already threatened me. They said that if I don't comply, there will be consequences. They can ruin my career, my life, and now after our wedding, I'm afraid you're in danger too. Andrew clenched his fists. He didn't like this situation. He wasn't going to back down so easily. They can't force us, he said firmly. You're not alone in this anymore. Kate looked at him with a mix of hope and fear. She didn't want him to suffer because of her. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't fighting this battle alone. We need to figure out our next move, Andrew said. I won't let them separate us again. Kate thought for a moment. We could talk to a lawyer. Maybe there's a way to protect ourselves. And you? Andrew nodded. That's a good idea. And we need to find out who this Grayson really is. Maybe he's not as clean as he seems. Kate shuddered. I've heard rumors that his family is involved in some shady business. But I don't have proof. Then we'll find it, Andrew said resolutely. If we have something solid, they won't be able to force you into anything. Kate ran her hand over her cup thoughtfully. Are you really willing to fight for this? For me. Andrew met her gaze. Not just for you, Kate. For both of us. Running was the only option. After everything that had happened, staying in Vegas meant exposing themselves to danger. Kate knew that her family wouldn't stop. They would search for her, demand force. Andrew understood that too. Their accidental marriage, which had first seemed like a mistake, had now become a barrier to those who wanted to control her life. We're leaving. Right now, Andrew said, looking at Kate. We need time and a place to think. Kate looked at him, feeling both fear and relief. She didn't want to keep running, but she had no choice. She nodded in agreement, and within minutes, they were speeding down the empty highway, leaving behind the lights of the city that had been both their trap and the place where they found each other again. Andrew gripped the steering wheel tightly. Kate sat beside him, silently staring out the window, her fingers unconsciously clutching the hem of her jacket. "Are you sure we're doing the right thing?" Andrew finally broke the silence, glancing at her briefly. Kate took a deep breath and turned to him. "I don't know," she admitted. "But if we stay, they'll find us. I need time. We need time." Andrew nodded. He felt the same uncertainty, but his instincts told him that running was the only right decision. They were heading toward a small town where they had once dreamed of living together as teenagers. Back then it had seemed so simple, a house by the lake, peace, freedom from the world. Now it was their refuge. After hours on the road, Andrew turned onto a dirt path leading to a small house nestled among the trees. He stopped the car and turned off the engine. Kate looked at him. "We're really here," she whispered. Andrew smiled. "Yeah, welcome home. At least for a few days." The house was old but cozy. Andrew remembered it from his childhood. It had belonged to a distant relative who had long since left, leaving the keys behind just in case they were ever needed. Everything was as he had remembered. A fireplace in the corner, wooden beams on the ceiling, the scent of old books lingering in the air. Kate ran her fingers along a bookshelf, then looked at him. "Did you really think we could have lived here?" she asked. "I knew we could," he replied. "The question is, what do you think?" She smirked. "I think nothing has ever felt this right." They spent the day exploring the surroundings, walking through forest trails, reminiscing about old dreams. It felt as if time had rolled back, and they were once again two teenagers making plans for the future. But reality still loomed over them. Late at night, they sat by the fireplace, wrapped in an old blanket. Kate stared thoughtfully at the flames, her eyes filled with worry. "I can't run from this forever," she said quietly. "At some point I'll have to make a choice." Andrew looked at her, his expression serious. "Whatever choice you make, I'll be here. But you have to decide, what do you want? Not what your family wants." Kate nodded. A storm raged inside her heart, but deep down she knew here with Andrew she felt free. The day started peacefully. Kate and Andrew enjoyed the quiet of the small house hidden among the trees. They had breakfast by the window, where the morning sunlight gently illuminated their faces. It felt as if the whole world had paused, giving them a chance to forget, even for a moment, the chaos they had left behind. But that peace was deceiving. The anxiety that had settled in Kate's chest since their escape hadn't disappeared. She knew it was only a matter of time before they found her. When a loud knock sounded at the door, her heart skipped a beat. She already knew who it was. Kate felt the blood freeze in her veins as her mother appeared in the doorway of the small house. Tall, poised, with that cold stare that had made Kate feel powerless since childhood. Beside her stood her father, his face rigid as if carved from stone. They had found her so quickly. Andrew stood behind her, tense, as if bracing for impact. He could feel the tension in the air, saw the way Kate's fingers clenched into a fist. "Pack your things," her mother said in an icy tone. "We're leaving. Now." Kate looked at her, then shifted her gaze to Andrew. Everything inside her rebelled. Once again they were trying to take away her choice, telling her what to do as if she were a child and not a grown woman. "No," she said firmly, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Her mother narrowed her eyes. "What did you say?" "I'm not going." Kate straightened, her heartbeat so loud it felt like everyone in the room could hear it. "I'm staying here." Her father stepped forward. "You have no idea what you're doing." His voice was low, threatening. "We spent years ensuring you had a respectable life, and now you're throwing it all away for a reckless marriage to this." He cast a disdainful glance at Andrew. "You don't even know what he truly is." Andrew, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "Then tell me, what am I?" His voice was steady, unwavering. "A problem," Kate's mother answered coolly. "A problem we will eliminate." Kate flared with anger. "You have no right," she exclaimed. "This is my life. I choose whom to love, whom to be with, whom to marry. And if you can't accept that, then I have nothing more to say to you." Silence fell. Her father clenched his jaw. Her mother's expression was filled with disappointment, but it no longer had the power to break her. "If you don't come back with us, Kate," her father said quietly but threateningly, "we will do everything to destroy his life, his business, his future. We can take it all away." Andrew clenched his fists, but Kate didn't let him speak. She took a step forward, meeting her parents' gaze head-on. "Then try," she said softly but resolutely. "But know this, I will never be your puppet again." She took Andrew's hand. He squeezed her fingers in return, letting her know he was there beside her. Together, they watched as Kate's parents slowly realized they had lost. Her mother lifted her chin, turned and walked out first. Her father lingered for a moment, as if hoping she would change her mind. But Kate stood firm. When the door finally shut, Kate felt the tension drain from her body. She turned to Andrew, her eyes glistening with tears, not of fear but of liberation. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "For the first time in my life." Kate sat on the porch of the small house, watching the crimson sunset. The wind gently played with her hair, and she held a warm cup of tea in her hands. For the first time in a long while she felt free. She was no longer afraid of tomorrow. Andrew stepped out of the house and silently sat beside her. He gazed at the horizon, as if searching for answers to 1,000 questions. There was no more worry in his eyes, only peace. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently, carefully covering her hand with his. Kate smiled. "About us. About how none of this was accidental. We could have gone our separate ways that night in Vegas, pretended nothing had happened. But we didn't." Andrew nodded. "Because we didn't want to. Because something inside us pulled us back together." She looked at him, her gaze warm and certain. "Do you believe in fate?" He thought for a moment, then smirked. "I don't know. I didn't before. But now I think I don't have a choice." Kate laughed and, setting her cup aside, turned toward him. "I never believed in it either. But maybe this is our chance? A second chance, something not everyone gets." Andrew studied her carefully before leaning in closer. "Then let's not waste it." She nodded, and in that moment, everything fell into place. The past no longer weighed them down. They looked toward a future that no longer scared them. Day quietly turned into evening. They sat side by side, savoring the rare moments of peace. At some point, Kate leaned toward him, her voice soft and thoughtful. "Are we really ready for this? For a new life?" Andrew gently squeezed her fingers. "I don't know what comes next. But I do know one thing. I want you by my side." Kate lowered her gaze to their intertwined hands and felt warmth spreading through her body. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of the future. "Then we move forward. Together." Andrew nodded and pulled her closer, their breaths mingling in a tender kiss. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but right now, in this moment, everything felt right. "What now?" Kate whispered. "Now," Andrew said, taking her hand. "We start fresh. Consciously. Without fear." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the twinkling stars. Their meeting in Vegas had not been a mistake. It had been fate. The real choice should be yours, not dictated by circumstances or someone else's will. Sometimes you have to take a risk to gain what truly matters. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.